Well, it's now 10:30, and so that means since it's Thursday and 10:30 in Central Time in South Dakota, it means it's time for Brainstorming the Human Connection, brought to you by the South Dakota Humanities Council. My name is Lawrence Diggs, and I'll be the moderator and inquisitor for this panel here. And we've talked, some time ago, not all that long ago, about uh, food systems and why that's important and what we can do with food systems and how they integrate uh, into making a community more, let's say, functional, getting their stuff together. We've also talked about uh, the importance of language and how language helps pull a people together, helps with identity, helps in communication, even uh, helps us to understand a culture in some depth that we can't without having some sense of language, the sounds, the meanings, and how they translate those meanings into things that, in another language, it might not even be a thing. Today, we're going to kind of put those two things together and talk a little bit about how, if you put those two things together, then you can maybe get a one and one is three kind of effect. You get more than the sum of the parts. Um, my guest today is Tierra Baird, and she's from Porcupine, and she's the director of the Oceti Sakowin Food Systems Alliance, and she's also an author. And we're going to be talking about her books, and we're going to be talking about um, how those books can be used and are used in language acquisition. And this is a um, interactive conversational program. So there'll be time that we look to you to add something to the conversation. This is not two talking heads uh, conversing only. We'll start out that way, but the real purpose is to give you a chance to interact not only with myself and other guests, but also between each other. This is a good time to practice those interpersonal skills and practice asking questions. So ultimate, ultimately, whenever you're in a situation where there's new information that is available, you have some practice in getting over the butterflies or whatever else other barriers there are to be able to ask questions, formulate the questions in your mind, and also it's a good listening thing. We have public speaking classes, but we don't have public listening classes, and we probably could use some of those in order to learn to hear better as well as speak better. So my guest today is Tierra Baird. Welcome, Tierra.
Hello. Good morning, everyone.
So Tierra, uh, you seem to be doing some very interesting work right now, and I'm wondering first if you could tell us about Tierra. Who is Tierra? How did she kind of spring forth and spring right into the role that you're in now? And then tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah. I guess before I begin, I'll just formally introduce myself. Hamidak yepi iuha chante washta napet chuzapi ksto, bakomi trajeki along gluhamani we amachiapi nahama shichia tirbeda machiapi, Oglala nasi changumala kota national kheche hamacha. Milaya tapika tioshbe na garninius tioshbe na baird tioshbe na machpia maza tioshbe emata. Hello, everyone. I welcome you with a good heart. My Lakota name is Woman Who Carries Their Songs, and my English name is Tierra Baird. I'm Oglala and Sicangu Lakota and Dine, and I come from the Knife Chief, the Guardianez, Baird, and Iron Club families. And so I'm happy to be here today, and I'm happy to kind of talk about, how I got into this work. So kind of like Lauren said, I am the director of the Oceti Sakowin Food Systems Alliance. But before all of that, before I got into this position, I last year I graduated from Stanford University with my bachelor's of science in earth systems with a concentration in land management and systems. And so during my undergrad, I was really trying to figure out because I really wanted to work on the land because I grew up on Pine Ridge. I grew up around my grandparents. I grew up around ceremonies and traditional harvesting, and so I knew my passions aligned with working on the land and building a relationship with my plant relatives and my animal relatives. And so whenever I went to college and when I was doing my undergrad and trying to figure out, what I was going to do afterwards after I graduated, I knew I wanted it to align with my cultural teachings and values. And so during the summer before my senior year, I got a Indigenous Communities Fellowship under Stanford, and this would allow me to work with any organization, kind of anywhere within an Indigenous community. And so I reached out back home to Makbialuta, Iowa, because they have a really great immersion language program, and I knew some people who were there, and so I reached out to the immersion, but I also reached out to Makbialuta Food Sovereignty Initiative. And so this initiative, they have a community garden, a greenhouse, and a cultural foods garden, or a cultural medicines garden. And so I wanted to work with plants. And at the same time, I also wanted to, because I had to do a project for this fellowship, and I had to have a deliverable. And so I reached out to Makbialuta Food Sovereignty, and they kind of accepted me because the fellowship was going to be paying for all of my work. And so during my summer, I was helping out at a community garden and helping out with some summer school kids. But at the same time, while I was there, I was reached out by Makbialuta Immersion Program, and they asked if I was willing to create some books help create some curriculum for their language students, because there isn't necessarily a lot out there, especially when it pertains to the sciences and kind of explaining, I guess, how things are done or how things grow. And so I thought, using my knowledge, I could, and using my research skills, I could kind of help them create these books. And so initially, I was just going to create. Initially, I was supposed to create like four, but I ended up creating five. And so Sierra Concha is the one who actually reached out to me, and so I really want to shout out to her because she was kind of the big pivotal person to kind of help me through this whole process. And so when I was at Makbialuta Food Sovereignty Initiative doing my internship, I was also researching and creating these books. And so every week I would meet with Sierra Concha and we kind of go over some ideas. And so we thought it'd be really great to kind of explain, how to harvest our traditional medicines. And there is no books on how to do that, especially how to do the traditional protocols. And so in these books, I really wanted to connect, the science of, why we eat these plants or why we use these plants, but also in the traditional sense, bringing in our traditional teachings. So in the books, I explain, and it's in the language. So I'm not a fluent speaker. I will say that I'm not a fluent speaker. I am still learning. And so it was really my collaboration with Sierra Concha, who is a language teacher at Makbialuta. She helped me with all the translations, as well as Peter Hill. And so when we created these books in the summer, she just asked kind of to focus on some plants that are around the area. And so I wanted to highlight Cheaka, which is mint, Teamsila, which is I guess like a type of root that we eat, and then Naposhtan, which is a flower, and then Ichachbehu, which is the purple cone flower. And so, and then when I got toward the end of the summer, I was like, oh, I feel like I could still make another book. And so I just made a little quick book on how to regrow celery from the store that you have. Like when you buy celery from the store, you can easily regrow it. And so I created a book on that. But in those four books where I highlight the plants, I talk about the cultural protocol that goes into how to approach these plant relatives and, the intentions that you bring to them. And so those are kind of the books, those are kind of how the books are premised. And then it also talks about how, and then in the books, it talks about how you can use them. And so that's kind of where another big part of my, I guess, research came in, was also using traditional protocols when I approach community members and relatives when asking for stories or knowledge. And so I think that was something that kind of created, I guess, kind of created a type of research protocol for myself, in the sense of, as an Indigenous person, how, and especially as a Lakota person, how can I can't just go up and ask people and then expect, because in our community, you can't just like ask and expect something without, like, knowing the protocols. And so I really wanted to bring in the social protocols when it comes to asking for these things. And so that's how I approached a lot of my relatives, with not my relatives, but community members and elders, when asking for particular knowledge or stories that pertain to these plants. And so I was able to use that in those books as well. And so yeah, so through the summer I got done. So I finished my internship, my fellowship with Mafia Luta Food Sovereignty. I finished the 5 books. And this was the time whenever I was getting ready to go back to college again to finish my senior year. And at the end of my fellowship, Sierra Concha was like, these books are really great. Do you think you can make us a little bit more when in your school year? And so I was really happy about that, because I really enjoyed making those books. I felt like doing those books was like, oh, I feel like I could do this like kind of for the rest of my life, because it was really fun. And I got to, because in the books as well, there's pictures, and I'm actually going outside and doing the demos of the pictures. And so you can see how I'm like harvesting them, how I'm using them, how to like, I guess, yeah, how to harvest and how to use them. And so I demonstrate all of that in the pictures. And so I had a lot of fun creating those books. And so whenever it came time for me to go back to Stanford, I had this work that Sierra Concha wanted me to do. And so it even fueled my passion even more, because whenever Makbia Luta Foods, no, not Makbia Luta Foods already, the immersion program, when they started school, Sierra Contra reached out to me and she was saying, Tierra, we printed out the books that you created and the students love them. Like they can't stop reading them. They really enjoy them. And, they're doing them, like they're doing some of the projects back at home. And so that like filled me with a lot. I was just really happy. I was full of joy about hearing about that, because, knowing that my work is actually, helping students learn, and especially because it's all in the language. The entire book is entirely in the language. And so these students are not only learning about our traditional protocols, but also they're learning the language at the same time, and also learning how to identify our traditional medicines. And so during my senior year, it got really busy because I was a senior, but I was able to create 4 more books. And so I wanted to kind of pivot away from plants for a little bit, because me and Sierra Concha were talking about how we wanted to create some science curriculum, because there's no science, obviously there's no science books in Lakota. And so she asked me if I could kind of create something along those lines. And so I wanted to create things that pertain to the seasons. And so during the fall, I thought it'd be kind of cool for the older kids to create some recipe books, some cookbooks. And so I created a vegetable soup book and how to make vegetable broth from your vegetable scraps. And so there's 2 books. One of them is on our website as well, on Makoce's website, which is where I work with. And so I created those 2 books. They did really well. The students had fun with them as well. And then after that, I wanted to create kind of some more books around spring, and kind of like how spring happens and what happens during that time, like not only to the planet, but to the plants. And so I created a book called Wetu, which is just spring in Lakota. And so these books, after I created the 5 books in the summer, these 4 books were kind of more at a higher reading level, a little bit more advanced vocabulary in Lakota. And so they're a little bit more lengthy. And so the Wetu, it goes through the science of, how the earth tilts during the spring and kind of what happens and how that influences the water and the plants. And so yeah, I was just really explaining kind of all it was a really lengthy research process, but I also wanted to make sure that, students had access to not only the science of what goes on, but also the language in that.
Yeah.
And so after creating What Do, I created the importance of bugs and in their ecosystems because not a lot of people talk about bugs, and so now that it's springtime and the bugs are out now, I thought it'd be really great to share what they do for our environment and for our ecosystems, and so that also is another lengthy book at a higher reading level. But I also wanted to not only go from a third grade reading level, which is the books I created in the summer, but also like up to like a sixth grade reading level.
Mhm. So before we go very much further, could you remind our panel here what is Makoce? What
Oh,
do they do?
yes. So I work with a nonprofit organization based in Porcupine, South Dakota called Makoce Agriculture Development. And the basis of all of our work is creating a local food system. And so we're really trying to change this mentality of, we're not in a food desert, we're in a food oasis because, we're surrounded by our plant relatives, we're surrounded by our traditional medicines. It's just making sure that, our community members know that they have access to those things and they know how to identify those. But not only that, from the cultural sense, but also giving them opportunities to engage in regenerative agricultural practices. So, right now we have a regenerative poultry program where we have community members learn how to care and maintain for chickens, and we provide the chickens, the feed, the supplies, and we also show them how to process their chickens so they have meat for the year. And so it's just, giving those opportunities for our community to engage in creating a local food system.
Mm. So when you talked about the books, I think it would be useful if we can see some of the books. So, Colby, you have some screen share, and then could you kind of walk us through what we're looking at?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, we'll wait till Colby gets it. There we go. Okay, can you tell us what we're looking at and how it fits into your efforts?
Yeah, so this is Asampi Iatke Wanakchao Iwo Unglakapi, which is how to harvest the yellow coneflower. And so it's just everywhere on the reservation. And so there's a lot of traditional stories and a lot of traditional teachings behind why we use this. And so I forgot to send I thought I sent like the books actually, but I guess they weren't attached. Um, and so as part of my work, the Oceti Sakowin Food Systems Alliance Initiative, the one that I'm director of, my work is really based in working collaboratively within our little local tribal economy. So, I work with a lot of tribal organizations, nonprofit organizations, tribal leadership, local schools, local businesses, farmers, and just kind of mostly everyone who is engaged in our local food system. And so a lot of my work is, bringing us together into like community meetings and addressing, some community needs. And so one of the highlights of these meetings is Oglala cultural foods education. And so there's a lot of conversation on how do we get our students access to more curriculum surrounding not only food sovereignty and our local food system, but also just how does that connect to, or how is that interconnected with our culture as well. And so with these books, when I created them, I was like, oh my gosh, when I came on to Makoce, I was like, oh my gosh, I can provide a resource because these are free. By the way, these are free. They're accessible on Makoce's website. Four of them are, I should say. Four books are accessible on the website, but we will be re-releasing the other five books every month from here on out. And so
So are they on the like a PDF file? Is that it?
Yeah, so if you go into the Makoce's website and click resources, you'll see the 4 books. And when you click on one of the books, it'll take you straight away um, to whatever book you clicked on. And so,
Yeah, here we go.
yeah.
Right.
So yeah, this is Wetu. And so, yeah, with these books, this was my way of contributing to I guess, one of our goals of expanding our cultural foods education on the reservation. And so, my work right now is, having other people also contribute to creating resources for our students. And it's going to take it's going to take some time to actually develop some curriculum, because there's not really some infrastructure on the reservation that can support that at the moment. But you know we as local organizations and as community members, we want to step up and help out in some way. And so I wanted to kind of use this as opportunity at Makoche to amplify these books that I have, because they were initially for immersion students. But whenever I graduated and I got my position at Makoche, I was like, this is also another place that I can also amplify these books, because now they're available for other language learners who might not be in school but have access to books so that they can also practice and learn.
So tell us a little bit about how these books are incorporated into various studies. How practically, on a practical level, how are they used?
So I guess practically they were just used in the immersion schools. At Makvia Luta, they have an entire I guess I don't want to say database, but they have an entire platform that holds all of their curriculum. So this is where these books are also housed for their students, so they have access to them. And so students right now are using them. And I was told by a couple of community members that they like to also read these, like a lot of their kids back home, they like to read them with their kids. And so I know that the community is using them, and I've heard pretty good positive feedback about them. And so I think in that sense, it's just the community, it's up to the community and the individual on kind of how they want to use it.
Hmm. So each community then uses it in a different way.
Yeah, yeah. And I think just right now, because a lot of our immersion kids, they're really integrated into the language. They really understand. A lot of my cousins, my little cousins, they speak Lakota to my elders, and so I know that they are definitely using them. And so
Oh,
I think this is just a really great resource for them to have, because they're longer books, as you can see. They're not
mhm.
like short sentences or anything, and they go into depth about these bugs. And so I think, just having a little bit more advanced curriculum can also really help as well, because whenever I was talking with Sierra Conscious, she said that she also uses the books to highlight some verbs and words that they haven't covered yet. And so she kind of
Right.
uses that as like next lessons, because uh, there's a lot of words in there that students haven't really reached yet. And so she's using that as like a kind of a way to advance their language speaking.
Right. Well, that sounds really wonderful. We're at a point now where we can include our other esteemed guests on this panel if they have any questions, comments, uh, wonderings, anything you guys want to add. Go ahead, Sharon, with your mic on.
Tierra, could you please read a couple pages of these in Lakota so we could hear how it sounds, how the language sounds?
Sure. I will say I am not the best person to. I mean, I can read it, but my pronunciations probably won't be the best. But
Well, I don't know anything,
um,
so I would be able to pick
I,
it up.
yeah, I can read
I'll
this.
help you out.
Right.
And so for this particular page, it says Dakukila na luha kte hecha watroto uspula ki chachopie wojuha waji checha waji wipuskepa na ish wina zeye wajina jajan eta.
And how about one of those pages that had the bugs on it?
You'll be fluent here pretty soon, Sharon.
Yeah.
At least you'll be able to talk about bugs to anybody, and they won't be able to challenge you.
You're right. How about this bumblebee, this bee, this?
We try jipa tranka unhana ataya zia na sabia hishmapi tezi el zia na sabia glegapi hu lazata ha o pie chi stila yukampi lena el wana wachchablu ea wanachcha etaha ichupi cha eashna ognakapi. Wichaya jipa tranka kila na unje el ima ipa jipa yukana dona kikle unipi o kihipi. Wichaya jipa chahampi wichaya jipa ki ish wan chala umpi o kihipi. Ho eash uchishi chapi shni na hochbi kawapi ki ihangwi cha kie wachani hashni hata dokani chiapi kdeshni.
I think you did a wonderful job, Tierra.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was like, there's some words in there that I know will always trip me up, but other than that.
Yeah, I mean, I could see how, one, at least for me, I'm dyslexic, so one should take that in mind. But when I see the words, it just it emphasizes how like a lot of syllables together can be kind of hard to wrap your head around unless you have been reading that thing over and over and over again. You can get, it seems like it would be easy to get tripped up.
Yeah, and it's also just because Lakota isn't necessarily a written language, and so reading it is kind of there's a lot of usually it flows, but whenever you read it, it's like very choppy.
That's right. Yeah, and that's interesting too, because the fact that it isn't traditionally a written language, but now in, let's say, last few hundred years anyway, people have been making an effort, and it doesn't seem to have been fully integrated even as much as now. So it's like you'll get people who are really fluent, but if you hand them, this book, their reading would be not so much different than yours. So,
Yeah.
so that's why I say you're doing pretty good. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions
Well, I did. Yeah. I just assumed I have looked up words that I've heard on Google in Lakota and been, had a definition of them. I just assumed that the language was currently written down. But as I'm seeing it on the screen now, there's no real translation of Lakota still.
Well, keep in mind that she said this is an immersion program, but you go ahead,
Yeah.
Tara.
But I was thinking that can the kids, let's say, a child that's reading the book only knows a little Lakota. If they're not in a class, how would they be able to read the book?
Since a lot of kids on the reservation have Lakota language class, we don't have like French or Spanish or anything. We just have entirely Lakota language class. And so a lot of kids growing up, they know how to pronounce words. They know how to make the guttural sounds or the tonal sounds in these. And so it's like how I grew up, I don't know the language fully, but I know how to, because I'm surrounded by my community members and my elders who also speak Lakota, I can kind of, and a lot of other kids can really pronounce these sounds. And so it's it's a learning process because they're also learning how to read as well. But I think whenever they have an adult with them present who also knows how to pronounce these words, because a lot of adults also aren't fluent, but they can read this as well. Because there's there's what do they call them? The indicators, the indicating marks above the words that you see or the letters that you see. So those kind of are hints on how to pronounce that. And
Well, and
so,
I think, well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, you can.
Well, I was going to say, when we think about education and language, many of us learn language in the worst possible way. And when you're trying, that is trying to teach it like a history class where you memorize these words and then they teach you about all the grammar and stuff. And that just happens not to be the way that people learn language. So when you're learning language in an immersive sense, it doesn't matter that you look at that and it doesn't make any sense. The whole idea is the repetition and being immersed in it. It just kind of start to click. That's how I learned French, was an immersion program. And it was a 13-week French program. And after the first week, we couldn't speak any English. Everything was in French. All of our whole life and telling us what to do and what the schedule was going to be, where we're going to meet. All of that stuff was in French. Well, the second week was like horror. But by the third week, you start picking it up. So I think that is the key to why this book actually, I think, will be a great addition to what they're trying to do, because now you actually have something that you can have a printed material in Lakota. And so while you're learning it, I think it makes for a much fuller learning process. Like what we did, for example, like all the things that we needed, all those things were in French. So nobody made a translation, but if you had a car, then somebody might put a label on that car, but it was in French. You know, and believe it or not, that's the way the Foreign Service teaches foreign languages. Like you go an immersion program, and after that, you're not allowed to speak anything but the target language. So I think these will be very helpful.
Yeah.
Anyone else have something? Oh, I'm sorry, Tia.
Oh, I was just going to add too that like while kids and language learners aren't they're on their way to fluency, they might not understand what these words mean, but it gives them the chance to actually pronounce words and to actually hear the flow of Lakota. And so yeah, I was just going to add that.
Yeah, because it's kind of how the brain works. It's like if you think about it, that's how kids learn. Nobody sits them down. When you're like 2 years old, nobody sits you down with a grammar book. You know what I mean? Hey, you kind of pick up from context the meaning of the words. You pick up from people, the syntax and how you put the sentence together, and you make a lot of mistakes. And then gently over time, you start to get it because everybody else is saying it in a certain way. And then when you say it, if you're understood, people just go along with it. But if you're not understood, and people go, "What the heck are you talking about?" Then, and then little by little, you get it together. So,
I
yeah,
had
go
one other
ahead.
question. I was looking up earlier. How do you, it seems like this food sovereignty program is like different groups. How do you work into the food sovereignty program? And is there someone that whoever the CEO is? My understanding is you got a grant from Bush Foundation, and then you have people that are dispersing that to $1.5 million, is that correct? Grant for the program. And then there's CEO and other people that work under it. And then I do have a little bit of interest in how the land is farmed. Are you restricted? I did read that there was a restriction on how you manage the land for this new food program. Do you know about that?
Sorry, could you kind of repeat your question?
Oh, I'm sorry. I read that the land on the reservation, that there was a bit of a restriction as the use of the land. So in this food program, you have a fair amount of land, right? That you're going to produce not only chickens, but you're going to have other crops available. And I may not have read it right. So how is the use of the land going to fit into this food sovereignty program?
Yeah, so kind of to just answer that pretty simply, like in the Lakota way, everything is very much interconnected. And so everything that we do, really we try to align that with our cultural values. And so when it comes to, what we're doing right now, pertaining to the land is, we do have all these goals that we want to reach. But right now, where we're at is we have the Woyute production farm, which is essentially where we're going to be housing our chickens that we're going to be, part of our regenerative poultry program that is for our community members. And so we planted some trees and some fruit trees on the land just recently. And then in the future, we have the plans. In the future, we're going to be building a Makoce food hub, which will kind of be like a little business district center where, those who want to sell their food, their crops, or, some things that they traditionally harvest, they can, sell them or give them away there. But we're also going to have a community garden in that space. And so there's a lot of obstacles when it comes to trying to access the land, because there's just a lot of historical components as well that limit access to our land. But also just currently in this day and age, we don't really have the infrastructure. I guess not, I shouldn't say infrastructure, but we don't necessarily understand, kind of how we are to access our land, because the reservation is a checkerboard. I don't know if anyone knows what that means, but essentially the reservation, there's little areas where land was sold to a lot of non-native farmers. And so when you look at the reservation, you'll see like it looks like a checkerboard, but it's essentially like farmland and cattle ranching land. And so because of and this just gets really difficult too, because when you bring in our treaty rights, what is that? How does that play out? Because the treaty says that we have access to a territory that is Oceti Sakowin's, but when it comes down to it, it's just us on our reservation. And then again, whenever the Dawes Allotment Act happened, I don't know if anyone knows familiar with the Dawes Allotment Act, but a lot of families, when they couldn't afford to pay for it, they had to sell their land. And so that's how a lot of non-native farmers now have access to land on the reservation. And so it just really makes it difficult as well to purchase. But not only that, we don't really know. There's a lot of obstacles to jump through when you're trying to apply to get land for agriculture, residential, or even just cultural purposes, because, it's not necessarily been done before. And it's really hard to do it because there's a lot of not only tribal infrastructure problems, like government wise, but also, our relationship to the BIA and the government is also really, is kind of, obviously difficult. And so there's a lot of historical and contemporary components that really make it difficult. But I think at Makoce, we really want to identify those issues on how to access land, and also working with our tribal programs like the OST Land Office and other tribal organizations that also want access to land, to identify how to streamline a really easy application process and kind of streamline an easy process to obtain land for, agricultural purposes, which is a lot of the direction of a lot of the direction for a lot of food sovereignty aligned organizations on the reservation. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah, I can see that it's much more complicated than I thought. Yeah, you're doing a wonderful job. Thanks.
thank you.
Anyone else have questions, comments?
You had mentioned that, specific on reservation for the kids and learning and their exposure to the language, but I'm curious about the off reservation. So my children haven't been exposed to that as far as that goes, and trying to do the accents, the gutturals, a lot of those tonal things that you talk about that aren't natural to me. So I feel very foolish when I attempt it, as their white parent as well. But how would they receive access? Vicky had asked about that for like the translations or hearing that. Is there a possibility of, these books that you've created being adapted into like an audio format, even just to hear them, to be able to better pronounce them themselves in their learning process?
Yeah, well, for pertaining to these books, we're actually going to be working on me and two other team members. One of our cultural foods intern, Esperanza Rema, and then Esperanza Rema, she's our cultural foods intern. She's also certified. She graduated this year, but she's also now certified to teach Lakota language because there's an SDSU program that offers that to high school students. And so she's certified to teach Lakota now. And so we're going to be both working on, basically reading these books and putting them out on our podcast. And, this is also a potential for us to collaborate with other organizations. And we have our own reservation radio, Keeley Radio, that we're hoping to also, be able to have a time to also read these stories on. But if you're looking for like access, there's a lot of resources on YouTube that are in Lakota. Particularly, I was thinking of the Berenstein Bears. They have Berenstein Bears episodes all in Lakota. So if that's also another resource if you want to. But yeah, so we're going to be working on getting these books out in audio form, just so that those who don't really want to read but they can listen. We want to give that opportunity too. So that is in the works right now.
One of the things that comes, two things actually that comes to mind with Tara's question is one, the PDF format actually allows you to record and follow along as it's read. But I don't know if it's in Lakota. I know that anything that I have in English, I can select that and press a couple of buttons on my computer, and wherever it is, it'll read it out for me in English. I'm certain that they have it in other languages. The question is, has anyone put it in Lakota? Because apparently they do have a Lakota language repository, because there's some translation stuff that comes up on Google. That's one. Then two, the PDF format will allow you to actually input it, as opposed to like the translator residing on your computer. So I'm just and in other words, you could make a recording and then it can be installed on the PDF format if you have the full version, the Microsoft full version of the PDF software. So are you familiar with those things, or does that sound like something that could be useful to you?
Yeah, I'm not really tech savvy, and so
Okay.
Our communications team at Makoce is really good. They know a lot of platforms, and so I'm really grateful to them because they're going to be the ones kind of helping me through this, and so I'm pretty sure that they'll have me do that because I know that they want me to record to reading them, but I know they probably know how to kind of do what you just said, what you just asked.
Right, and that might be a good way to bring in and this is more of a question than it is a statement. The elders who have, let's say, an easy flow, and so that they can hear like a person who's been speaking it for 50 plus years, like how would they say it? Because I know when I've learned language, the bane or the worst possible thing in taking language classes is hearing the teacher say it correctly once and all the students screw it up. So it's the more time you hear it wrong, the more likely you are to, oh, your brain wants to say it the wrong way, especially if they're all saying it the wrong way the same way. So
Yeah, I think it'd be really great to incorporate the elders. I know though that I will say that these books, they're kind of written in an English format, in the sense of how it's read. And so it doesn't necessarily match up to like how a Lakota person would speak in a day to day.
oh really? That's
And
impressive.
so, yeah, so it's, we're writing these books because we're kind of coming at these at like a Western sense, of writing them out in a scientific way, writing them in a way that people don't necessarily speak, because they are curriculum books. And so I think I've heard this a lot with my elders, when it comes to like Lakota language textbooks, that are given to students. There's a lot of critiques about that, how they're teaching it, because a lot of elders believe that if you listen to it and you're learning how to speak it, because speaking it in conversation is completely different from how it's taught in our language textbooks, in our books.
Yeah, definitely. That's that's an interesting problem to have, and
Yeah.
and I would say my experience is that it's unfortunately not unique to the Lakota language. There's a lot of languages which have, and some of them have very old writing systems, but the writing system and the literary writing system is much different than we speak. In fact, we could say that about English in lots of ways. When you pick up a paper, especially a science paper, nobody talks like that in real life, like science papers. And that's why science papers are often hard for people to read. It's not that the information is complex, it's that they're speaking a whole different language, you know, in addition to using words that that are like, not something you say, but the way they talk and the way they write, it's like it's awkward to wrap your brain around, even though, if you just didn't hear it, somebody just explained it to you in like regular English, it would be pretty straightforward. But the way they write it down in those papers, you go, what? So yeah. So that's an interesting problem to be up
Yeah.
against. Before we go on, any other questions or comments?
I did have another question, Tara. I was checking to see if a part of the books and the teachings, especially with the young people and the students, I know that you pray for your plant relatives, and give them offerings. Is that a part of it as well in the teachings of the cultivating and harvesting of the plants? Is that included in these books?
Yes. In the four that I mentioned, the How to Harvest Ichakwehu, Timsila Cheaka, and Naposhna, all those books are really grounded in practicing cultural protocol. And so in the language in the books, it tells you how to approach the relative, and what to offer, and kind of not necessarily what to say, because but just offering a prayer and your intentions. So the protocol that goes behind that, it's in the book. So before you start harvesting and learning how to use it, that's like kind of one of the very first things is teaching that cultural protocol in approaching a plant relative.
Is there a blanket prayer or, like to get started? Is there something to use for that at all? Like that would be something as a starting point as well to begin the journey of that?
Yeah, in the books, it just kind of explains like within your prayer, you talk about you know, expressing gratitude not only for you coming across a plant relative, but also gratitude for how they'll be harvested and, used and shared among like your relatives. But also, within your prayer, stating your intentions with the plant. Because, you don't just want to harvest just to have, just making sure that it's kind of just like, talking to and acknowledging your relationship with the plant relative. So it's not like, like you're talking to God, like when you pray in that sense, but it's just, acknowledging your relationship with the plant relative. You can't really go wrong in any way, in any sense, just, making sure that you're clear in your gratitudes, and your intentions with it.
I had one idea. Is it possible just by page number to write it in English and have a supplement to the book in English per page? Just something inexpensive that could go along with the book? Like someone could order that if they're really, not not that. Oh, sorry, they just don't speak it that well. So if they see the pictures and they see the Lakota writing, but they don't speak it, if you just had a supplement in the back, they could sort of figure it out if they're a beginner for a trial.
Yeah.
Well, that's what you don't want. That's exactly what you do not want in an immersion class. You do not want people translating. If for you, if just as a passive, casual, interested academic, it might work. But the last thing you want in an immersion class is for kids to try to translate. They need to, just like in English, you don't translate it into something else. People just talk and you know what they're talking about. That is the goal of an immersion program. So good immersion programs they might let you see a dictionary, but most of the time they don't. Most of the time you sit in the program and you start speaking, and after a while you get it. Now, at least for us in the first couple of weeks, maybe you see a dictionary, but after that, they want you to quickly move past the dictionary.
Well, I was thinking for me.
Oh yeah, for you, yeah, I understand. But when you said so that the kids could do something, I said, oh no, not the kids. Don't mess up the
I was
kids.
really interested in with the intentions. That's something that's not, I don't know about. I just thought I've looked at the books. I would love to have some, but it looks like Chinese to me, sort of. I mean, I just have no comprehension of what's going on. So I was actually thinking about purchasing some for me. Sorry.
Yeah, the books, there is English translations of them. I do have them. They're in our organization Google Drive. But I think one of the things that we really want to highlight is not, I mean, like we want to provide those translations. But at the same time, we really also want our own community members to be immersive, because these resources are for them, and they, it's for them to learn with. And also I will say that Lakota is also translated differently among each community, because different words, are translated by different communities, different. So it's hard to provide an English translation. Like I can give you like the basis of what's being talked about, but if you talk with other communities, one word might mean something a little bit different than my own community. And so this for right now, I think one of the things that we want to pride ourselves in at Makoce is just providing these immersive resources for our community members at the present moment. So in the future, we might be providing those translations, but I think for right now, we're just having it completely in the language.
They're quite beautiful.
Oh, yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I like the the artistry of the written word too. That even when they're in different fonts, the artistry of it is quite interesting, even if you have no idea what they're saying. I think I can appreciate it for its for the artistry. Anyone else? We're ramping down on our 10:30 time, so if you got a question or something, pop up. Well, Let's talk then about where you're going with this. We've talked about where you've been and where you are now. Where do you see going with this in the future? What else, if you had the resources, whatever resources you needed, what would you like to do?
I think for right now, since I live at home, I work on my reservation, and I'm engaging in creating a local food system, engaging in food sovereignty. That's kind of where I'm really passionate about food sovereignty, and working on the land, and so I see myself, um, engaging in not only my tribal community but other tribal communities, because they also have very much similar things going on, and I think that creates a potential for all of us to connect with one another and to learn from one another. And so from these books, I loved creating these books. Like that was probably like one of the highlights of my summer, was creating these books, and my senior year as well. And so I think moving forward, having created these books, it was just so glaring to me. I was like, really need to learn my language. Because I can kind of pick up some words, I can kind of understand some things, but this just, for me, it just showed to me that I really want to, learn the language so that I can pass it on to my children and my grandchildren. And also to also create more resources that are Lakota language accessible. Because there's not a lot of curriculum, like I said, that is based in Lakota language on not only cultural teachings, but also just how our relationship with the land is, with the animals, with the plants. And so I think moving forward, I really want to not only just work in my community and work with Makoce, but also to start really getting into my language learning journey. Like I said, I'm still learning right now, but I really want to engage myself into the language, because it's just really beautiful, and it's really hard to translate sometimes to English, but there's a certain feeling, and you can understand, like it's hard for me to translate some words because it's just inherent to know, but I also want to kind of learn more of those words and the feelings that those carry. And so I think moving forward, I really still want to stay in food sovereignty. I love working with plants, and I love learning about how we build up Lakota food sovereignty. But at the same time, I also want to do my part for my people and the future generations to also learn the language, because we need to keep it alive.
Well, I would say that you're well on your way. Sharon, you had something you wanted to
A
say?
quick question. Tiara, is that the name on your birth certificate? Because I think it's the Spanish word for earth, and that you would like, you're so bound with the earth. I think it's quite a coincidence.
Yeah, it is my name, my birth, it's on my birth certificate. It's actually kind of funny. It's like my family likes to talk about that. Like I'm so engaged with the land so much, and that's like it's just in my name.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. Interesting. You know, we got about 2 minutes, but I'd like to commend you on your effort because I think it's so important. And I would add that, what you're doing is just the connection is so important to learning the language, in addition to the sovereignty piece.
Mhm.
Because, one of the things about learning language is the things that you remember are and the ways that you express things have a direct connection on your passion toward that thing. A good extreme example is one of the things that people learn quickly in the new language is where's the bathroom, you know, because when you have to go, you have to go. And if you don't know where it is, you got to be able to say, "Donde está el baño?" You know, and if you can't, there's an accident waiting to happen. And things like when you're hungry, to be able to say "j'ai faim," you know, you have to be able to use, you know, to express your needs, especially those passionate ones. So when you're passionate about the land, and when you have a sense of like what's happening, there are approaches and attitudes toward the land that you may not be able to communicate in English. And so that's where the problem with translation comes, because then you start thinking like an American or an Englishman about the land, when no, it's not that. It's this word. It's this thing that encapsulates the feeling. No translation ever encapsulates that feeling. So I think you provide a platform for people to experience the land in a very special way. So thank you for that, your effort. Well, that's about all the time we have. Thank you again, Tierra, for coming on and sharing with us. And we hope the best for your Makoce project. And we hope to see you guys again and keep up to date on any progress that you're making or barriers that you're facing, that people may have resources to help you.
Yeah. Thank you all for having me. I had a great time today.
All right. Thanks.
All right.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Till next week.
Bye.